Hello everyone, in this vlog I will be discussing the key arguments from my critical essay titled From Page to Screen, an analysis of Kenneth Branagh's Death on the Nile through Hawkins' theory of adaptation. My essay examines how Agatha Christie's novel Death on the Nile is adapted into the 2022 film directed by Kenneth Branagh. Rather than judging the film based on fidelity to the novel, I apply Linda Hawkins' theory of adaptation, which views adaptation as a creative and interpretative process. Specifically, I will focus on three operational aspects proposed by Hawkins: transposition, creation, and reception, and I analyze how narrative structure, characterization, and meaning are transformed when the story moves from page to screen. The adaptation has often been criticized for being unfaithful to its source text. However, contemporary adaptation studies challenge this idea. Scholars such as Linda Hawkins argue that adaptations should not be seen as secondary or inferior texts, but as independent works shaped by different media conditions and audience expectations. In my essay, I adopt this perspective to move away from simple comparisons of what is missing or what has changed. Instead, I examine why these changes occur and how they function within the cinematic medium. This approach is particularly relevant for detective fiction because detective narratives rely heavily on internal reasoning, narrative control, and delayed revelation, features that function very differently in novels and films. The main theoretical framework used in my essay is Linda Hawkins' model of adaptation, which identifies three interconnected processes. First, transposition, which refers to how narrative elements are transferred from one media to another. Second, creation, which focuses on the new elements added by the adaptation. And third, reception, which examines how adaptations are interpreted within specific cultural and historical contexts. In addition, I use thematic theory to analyze how meaning is constructed in film through visual signs such as costume, setting, performance, and mise-en-scène. This helps explain how literary descriptions are translated into cinematic language. The first aspect I analyze is transposition. In Christie's novel, narrative information is mainly conveyed through language, dialogue, and internal reasoning. Readers follow the detective's thought process through verbal explanation and retrospective narration. However, in the film adaptation, these narrative strategies must be transformed. Internal reasoning is externalized through thematic techniques such as facial expression, camera movement, and editing. For example, Poirot's analytical thinking is no longer explained through narration, but suggested through close-up shots, pauses, and visual framing. This shows how transposition involves reorganization rather than direct transfer, as the film adapts the detective process to suit a visual medium. Transposition also affects characterization and spatial relationships. In the novel, characters are primarily defined through dialogue and narrative commentary. In the film, character meaning is constructed through performance, body language, and interaction with space. The confined setting of the Nile vessel is visually emphasized through camera positioning and blocking, which helps establish tension and the relational dynamics between characters. This visual organization replaces the novel's descriptive passages, demonstrating how cinematic space functions as a narrative tool. Overall, transposition reshapes how information is delivered and how audiences engage with the detective narrative. The second operational aspect is creation, which refers to the addition of new narrative and stylistic elements. In the 2022 film adaptation, there is a stronger emphasis on emotional backstory and interpersonal relationships compared to the novel. The film expands character motivations and foregrounds emotional conflict even before the century crime occurs. These additions are not present in Christie's original text, but they function to increase emotional engagement for contemporary audiences. This reflects how adaptation is not simply about retelling a story, but about creatively reinterpreting it to suit modern cinematic conventions. Creation is also evident in the film's visual and stylistic choices. The adaptation employs elaborate mise-en-scène, dramatic lighting, and stylized costume design to create a visually rich setting. These visual elements function thematically, communicating power, desire, and emotional tension without relying on dialogue. The film also blends detective fiction with elements of romance and creating a hybrid genre that differs from the restrained logic of Golden Age detective fiction. Such creative transformations highlight how cinematic adaptations respond to dominant film genres and audience expectations. The third aspect is reception, which focuses on how adaptations are interpreted by audiences. The 2022 film is received within a contemporary cultural context that differs significantly from a historical context of Christie's novel. Modern audiences bring expectations shaped by previous adaptations, current cinematic trends, and heightened awareness of issues such as representation and historical ideology. As a result, narrative changes and the visual emphases in the film are interpreted through present-day cultural frameworks. Reception is therefore not fixed, but shaped by audience familiarity, social values, and intertextual memory. From a reception perspective, meaning is produced through the interaction between the film's adaptive strategies and the audience's interpretative literacy. Thematic elements such as costume, setting, and performance guide viewers' emotional and symbolic interpretation. The demonstrations that adaptation extends beyond the textual transformation to include how stories are culturally read and evaluated. The reception of Death on the Nile thus reflects broader discussions about adaptation, genre evolution, and contemporary cinematic storytelling. To conclude, this vlog has summarized the main arguments of my essay by examining Death on the Nile through Hodgson's three operational aspects of adaptation. The analysis shows that the film adaptation is not merely a retelling of Christie's novel, but a reinterpretation shaped by cinematic form, creative expansion, and contemporary reception. By moving away from fidelity-based judgment, adaptation can be understood as a dynamic process in which narrative meaning is continually transformed. In this sense, Death on the Nile illustrates how adaptation functions as an ongoing dialogue between text, media, and cultural contexts. And thank you for your listening and watching.